We're going to move on to the bottom part of the assembly where the fuel is contained. So you saw how dirty it is. We're going to get the remaining fuel out of this thing, and then we'll clean it out. And then once we do that, this is the Swirl Jet. We're going to pop this Swirl Jet out of here, which can be a little tricky. You got to be careful. It's all plastic, so you can easily break it if you don't do it correctly. So we'll pop this guy out after we get it all cleaned out, and then we're going to drill it out, and we'll show you how to do that. So we've cleaned most of it out simply just using compressed air. I use just a little bit of shop air. You can see how clean it is, and we'll give it a little final wipe down. And what I like to do is use a little bit of Royal Purple Max film. This stuff is great. I'll just spray it in there to kind of work it in. This will help. So sometimes you can get it out with your thumb. I'm going to use a deep socket 7mm just to kind of get over this guy. And again, being somewhat careful. All right, so we've got it partially out of the way. This one really fought us. So what I did is just kind of makeshift. I stuck this little bit driver in there, and then got our 1/4 inch socket and extension, and got over the top of it, and then just with our little rubber mallet just started tapping it out. Boom, and there is our Swirl Jet. So again, the purpose of why are we removing this? Well, with a higher flowing pump, we need to get more fuel past this orifice on this jet. So to do that, we're going to drill it out. And the reason why is it will create too much pressure in the assembly. It can't get enough fuel out. So you'll have a harder time lowering your base fuel pressure. A lot of guys won't take the time to remove this, even on a returnless. So by drilling this out, we'll be able to get closer to that. So I'm going to start off with a 3/32 drill bit, and then we're going to make our way to a 7/64. And you don't want to drill through the assembly. You don't want to go past this point. We're just opening the first half of this. Otherwise, if you go too far, then you've damaged it. Okay, so we've opened it up. We're going to go, this size is a 7/64, so we're going to go up one more size from that 3/32 that we used. You could damage it potentially because this is pretty big, and you know, the outer diameter is pretty close to what this inner diameter is. Go slow, making sure not to go through the other side. And we'll do it again, clean off our little drill bit. All right, and there it is. So again, clean off the burrs. All right. We'll make our life a little easier by putting some Max film in there. Now that we've got the bottom assembly, the canister, we can prep our pump, putting it in from the bottom, and then we'll figure out where our orientation is going to be based on where the outlet of the pump is going to go on the billet hat, and also the positioning, most importantly, the positioning of the sock, the pre-filter inside the canister. So we want to make sure that this sock isn't going to impede with the connection. So this is the sock, very common, the sock that comes with these Walbro pumps. I love these things because you don't need to have a little clip that you put on after the fact. So go on there, line it up, and then I just like to give it a couple of taps. So this is where we want to be careful, is we want to make sure that our sock doesn't go over the Swirl Jet, because you have this guy that needs to attach to the Swirl Jet. And so if you have your sock in the way and you don't install it correctly, and then you're still wondering why you're having fuel delivery issues, you followed everything. So there's a lot of detail you've gotta have and gotta know when you're installing all this stuff. So you want to make sure that the sock is out of the way when you put all this stuff in. Attach this back in, it just clips in, and this is just a little press fit. It's going to go like that. So you've got that, and then now you're going to set the assembly in there. So you can tuck the sock underneath it like so. Before we actually put the whole assembly back in there, it's easier to do this now, is to actually attach the return hose side of it to our regulator delete. So, because once this is all in, it's going to be kind of tough to kind of get in there. And I'm going to replace these clamps, and we're going to use the Oetiker clamps on this. Just going to use a little bit of our Royal Purple, position our Oetiker in there, push down, and this is why I say it's easier to do this now. Clamp it down just like that, really easy to use, and there it is. And then now we can put our assembly in the canister. Again, you want to make sure that your sock isn't covering the Swirl Jet. When you put it in, you should feel it kind of lock into place on the bottom, and then you'll pop your tabs back in. You have these two tabs, and there you have it. So this is what you'll end up with on this step. So See how it's really close there? So now we have room to install it with it removed from the assembly. We are going to reuse the rods that come on the factory fuel pump assembly, and to get them off, I'm just going to remove this hose out of the way. If you simply snap these off, you're going to break the plastic with the rod. So one thing I like to do, a little easier for me because I have this little torch. We'll use this torch. You just want to be very careful near fuel. And we're going to heat up that plastic and soften it up just enough so we can pop that rod off of there, just like that. The unboxing of our billet hat. These parts are from CJ. All right, so we'll start off with what's in here. Your feed hose, and if you have the return fuel system, you may or may not have some of the fittings that you're going to get, and your adapter fitting that's going to connect to the factory fuel line. So we're going to use that, and then we've got these really bitchin' swivel fittings that we're going to use on the top hat, so we can rotate 360 degrees. So we'll get to that part, and our connectors. So we have two different ones. The one that's insulated is going to go on the outside, and the one that has no insulation is going to go inside the assembly. And let's get this bad boy, the best part of it. And there it is, beautiful piece. Okay, so our next step, guys, is we're going to get our rods that we previously removed from the plastic hat at the factory assembly. And in the pack of hardware here, we're going to open this up. Our pins, you're going to see the new bolts that go on the top of the assembly. We're not going to reuse the factory stuff, as mentioned. And then we have our set screws, these two guys, to contain the rods onto the hat. So the side that went into the plastic is going to go into the hat just like that. The hardware for the majority of the CJM stuff is all American. So this is a 3/32 Allen socket. We'll thread it in by hand, and then we'll just snug them down a little bit. And you want to make sure that these are all seated all the way down. Right? We had them upside down, so they were bottomed out. All right, guys, so just to recap, this is where we're at now. This is our assembly now. Our next step is getting the rest of our billet hat set up. Rods are in place, and now we have to pick our configuration. So I like to use the A for the return, which is going to reuse the factory line, and it's repurposed now. It's not going to be feeding the engine. Now it's going to be the return side. And then we'll use the C for our pump outlet. So the fuel that's going to be coming out of the pump, going to the filter, and then from the filter to the engine. All right, so you're going to notice that the way we order these is, and you're going to have the 8mm, which is the smaller size. You can clearly see the difference for the return side. So you got to make sure you don't mix these up.
Can you show me the difference again?
Yeah, so the difference is right there. You can see, I don't know if you can get it on video pretty good, but you can see that this is a larger diameter by 2mm, and this is 8mm, so 8 to 10. So this is going to be our fuel pump side. This will be our return side. So C and A. And we'll make sure we get a good coating on all three of these O-rings. And then once those have been threaded in by hand, we're going to tighten them down. It should be a 19mm socket is what we use. And we'll get those tightened up. And then after that, we'll put our fittings, our swivel lock fittings on there. You have a snap ring that's going to go at the top. So you are going to need, you don't need them, but I recommend them, snap ring pliers. Let's tighten these bad boys down. Again, a 19mm deep socket is what I'm using. Have to be nice and tight, nothing crazy. O-rings are ready to go. They've been lubed up. Put our swivel fitting on there, and we're going to kind of twist and push down at the same time. Okay, so we don't want to damage those O-rings, so just like that. Okay, and so this is the really badass part about this is these guys will swivel wherever you need them to. And again, we need our snap ring to hold it into place. I'm going to work it on by hand first. Keep it there, just like that. Goes into that machine groove on the top. So now our fitting can't pop out. There you go. All right, and then you're left with an open port. The kit comes with 2 plugs. We're just going to be using one of them. It's got an O-ring, again, same thing. This is American, 1/4 inch. So there we have it. We've got our top hat prepped. Fittings are on. It just gives you more room, I guess. It doesn't really matter, but we'll stick it on after, once we get it installed under the tank and into the car. And then the next order of business is, so it's going to go on our smaller barb, and then we're going to get our hose. This is the hose that came with the fuel pump, 10mm. You can see that it's larger than the other, so you want to make sure you're using the appropriate sized hose. So you can see the difference in the hose, 8mm and 10mm. Okay, then you want to make sure you have your hat positioned correctly. So if we're sitting looking at the back of the car and we're installing this assembly, the float goes towards the back of the car. So this is going to go in this way, and the billet hat is going to be facing you as you install it. So the CJ part is going to face you as you're installing it. So it's going to go in like this, so we can make sure we have it positioned correctly. Okay. So we're going to reuse one of the springs. We'll get our spacer on there first. Snap that back into place just like that. This spring always goes on the float side. Easy way to remember it. If you didn't take photos, basically attach these guys on there. So, the nice thing with this, not in the right position, so to speak, but it'll move over like that. So we'll get our Oetiker clamp on, and you can also, to make the install a little easier, is you can heat up the hose, make it soft, and it is a very tight fit, and you want it to be, obviously, because you don't want any leaks. Okay. And then with the hose bottomed out, tighten down our clamp, just like that. Okay, so that's our return side. So the assembly is gonna come down just like that. That hose will sit nicely just like that. We'll remove our cap on the pump outlet, add that on there so we can get any debris in there, and then we'll kind of mock up our hose. It's gonna do something like this. You just don't want it to kink. That's all you're after. So you do kind of want it to move up, right? Because of the spring we have here. Again, it's a very tight fit. And now with our hose slipped over the barb, we'll use our Oetiker, and we are using a larger Oetiker on this one, just like that. All right, Oetiker on before we slip our hose to the fitting. All right, get our Oetiker into position. All right, we're all set. This is what we're left with. The next part is the wiring part. So we'll finish by wrapping up our wiring, getting it wired and pinned out to our new connector. And we have the fuel temperature sensor we need to wire, our common, our ground, that's shared between the float and the temp sensor, and then we have our remaining wire for the float assembly itself, so, which provides signal. All right, so I lubed up the seal just because it makes it easier to push it in to the fuel pump, and you'll see that you don't really need to have this much wiring. I usually do kind of leave it long, that way the connector can kind of sit down like this and it's not being tugged. So we'll run our wiring kind of through this way. So you'll notice with the CJM kit, you have a larger connector for a bigger gauge wiring, and then you have the smaller ones. So we'll use the bigger stuff for the actual fuel pump connections. So for our power and our ground, it's very important. So we've got our crimp tool. You got to make sure you have a really good crimp tool. I get it into position, and then we'll work our way down in size. We'll do our ground side. And again, if you don't have the right tools or even the experience, this is where you can really muck things up, so to speak. Because any of this stuff is done incorrectly, you're going to have issues. The car can leave you stranded. You're not going to get enough fuel delivery, and your tuner is going to be trying to help you troubleshoot what's going on. Usually 90% of the time when we see fuel delivery issues with remote tunes, it's something inside this assembly that somebody got wrong. So here's how you want your crimps and your pinouts to look. Nice and clean. You've got good equal distribution on your wires. And then we can pin these in. You'll hear a little snap, and you know that they're in place. Boom. And then once we're done populating all the wires and pins, we'll push our locking blue tab in so that these can't pull out. All right, guys. We have our last 4 wires on the inside that we need to wire up, and then we've got these 2, so we'll do that. So first, we'll route these guys nice and clean, kind of the way the factory had it. And after we get done finishing our wiring in here, I like to zip tie this stuff up, make it a little cleaner too. Okay. And we're simply just going to cut the ends of these off, right where those terminals are. And we're going to use these smaller terminals and pins that comes with the CJM kit. All right, and then when you're stripping these wires, you don't want to have too much of a lead, because otherwise it's going to dangle past too far. You kind of want to have it to be the same size as your crimp area is going to be. I never really liked wiring, but now that I've done it for so long, it actually is kind of relaxing. I enjoy it, and it's not overly difficult. You just got to think about it, understand the way it works, which is not complicated, and then we'll finish populating this, and then we'll finish populating this. What we'll do is we'll put our float signal here, click, and then we'll separate the two. And last but not least, and there it is, when you're locked into place, ready to go. All right, guys, so here's what we got. This is what the final assembly looks like, and it's ready to be dropped in. One thing I do like to do, threads. This is more of an issue when you're using two dissimilar metals. So these are aluminum, and let's say you are using stainless steel for your hose fitting. The stainless and the aluminum always don't play nicely, so what I like to do is use a little bit of anti-seize on the thread portion. So we'll do that. So that's set in place, and then we'll use our new hardware. It comes with the billet hat. And a reminder, you're not going to use that pump assembly bracket on the top. The CJM is standalone, doesn't need that. Again, keep in mind it seals with the AN face, but it also has an O-ring, so we lube that thing up as well. Make sure we don't damage the O-ring. Tighten her down, because this one likes to fight to get it in.